Did you know that over 1,200 police officers in the United States have been caught stealing drugs, money, and other evidence from crime scenes, just in the last decade? It's a staggering figure that scratches the surface of a much deeper problem. But what happens when the person who's supposed to uphold the law becomes the criminal? And what if that officer isn't just corrupt, but also fueled by racist motives? Before we begin today's story, please let us know where you are viewing from. Please remember to subscribe if you like this video. In today's chilling story, a decorated officer in a quiet Midwestern town was praised as a hero, until body cam footage, whistleblower reports, and one brave teenager blew his cover wide open. What was he hiding? Evidence. Drugs. Even cash. But worst of all? A hatred that cost innocent people their freedom. This isn't just a story about stolen evidence. It's about how power, prejudice, and corruption collided, and nearly destroyed an entire community. Police misconduct isn't just about excessive force or racial profiling. Sometimes it goes deeper, into evidence rooms, unreported crimes, and secret deals that never make it to court. In this story, we dive into the dark underbelly of a case that shocked both the media and the justice system. A respected police officer, applauded for his tough-on-crime approach, was secretly sabotaging cases and framing people of color, all while stealing evidence to fund his own private empire. This story is not fiction. It's built on real interviews, court records, and investigative reports. As we peel back the layers, you'll see how the officer's actions went unchecked for years, and how one brave voice finally brought it all crashing down. Corruption in law enforcement is not new. But what happens when that corruption hides behind a badge, a uniform, and the illusion of justice? When we think of police misconduct, most people picture headlines about shootings, chases, or wrongful arrests. But beneath those headlines lies a more insidious threat: evidence tampering. It's a betrayal that strikes at the core of our justice system. When the people who are tasked with enforcing the law begin to manipulate it for personal gain, the entire structure collapses. Across the United States there have been dozens, if not hundreds, of cases where officers were caught stealing drugs, money, or weapons from evidence lockers. Sometimes it's to feed an addiction. Other times it's greed. But in rare and deeply disturbing cases, the motivation is something far darker: racism and control. When an officer starts targeting certain communities, hiding or planting evidence, and then using that evidence to manipulate court outcomes, it becomes more than corruption. It becomes systemic abuse. And the damage? It ripples outward. Innocent people end up with criminal records. Families are torn apart. Entire neighborhoods lose faith in law enforcement. Witnesses refuse to come forward. Victims stop reporting crimes. But the worst part? It's hard to detect. Officers control the chain of custody. They write the reports. They testify in court. Their words often carry more weight than anyone else's. So when one of them decides to break the law, they usually know exactly how to get away with it. This story begins in a quiet, mostly white suburb just outside of St. Louis, Missouri. Officer David Ryland had been on the force for nearly 12 years. Decorated, respected, feared. He was known for being by the book, but locals whispered about how many young black men he seemed to arrest, and how often their charges mysteriously stuck. Ryland had a nickname around the neighborhood: the Hammer. His arrest record was impressive, until you looked closely. That's when things began to unravel. It started with a routine traffic stop. A high school senior named Jalen Matthews was pulled over for a broken taillight. No drugs. No weapons. Just a cracked light. Officer Ryland claimed he smelled marijuana and asked to search the vehicle. Jalen, knowing his rights, politely declined. Ryland insisted. Within minutes, a small baggie of cocaine was found tucked under the passenger seat. But Jalen's mother, a paralegal, didn't buy the story. Jalen had no prior record. He was enrolled in college for the fall. He didn't drink, let alone use drugs. And the kicker? His car had been thoroughly cleaned the week before by a professional detailer, who had installed a dash cam system. When that footage was recovered, it didn't show Ryland finding anything. In fact, it appeared he reached into his own vest pocket and slipped something into the car. The video was grainy, but the implication was clear. Jalen's mother took the footage to a local reporter, who quietly began digging. What they found was chilling. Over the past 3 years, Ryland had made 53 drug-related arrests involving Black or Latino men between the ages of 17 and 30. Out of those, 19 had disputed the charges, claiming drugs were planted or that their vehicles or homes were searched illegally. Most were dismissed in court, except in cases where Ryland was the only witness and body cam footage mysteriously malfunctioned. Meanwhile, rumors began to swirl at the precinct. A rookie officer, who asked not to be named, told reporters that Ryland often entered the evidence room alone, staying past his shift. When questioned, Ryland claimed he was rechecking reports or following up on missing tags. But the real red flag came when the department underwent a surprise audit. Nearly $75,000 worth of seized cash, multiple firearms, and large quantities of narcotics were missing or miscounted. The internal affairs team launched an investigation, but Ryland was smart. He'd covered his tracks, signed off on his logs, and even blamed a glitch in the evidence management software. It almost worked, until one anonymous tip blew the whole thing open. The tip came from a teenage intern at the station named Kyle Pearson. He wasn't a cop. Just a quiet 18-year-old interested in law enforcement, doing summer volunteer hours. Kyle was assigned to help with filing, and occasionally shadowed officers on minor tasks. One night he stayed late, cleaning up paperwork. He walked past the evidence room and saw Officer Ryland inside. The lights were off. The door was supposed to be locked. Kyle peeked through the small window and saw Ryland with a duffel bag, the kind used to transport evidence. Ryland was stuffing something inside. Cash. Bags of powder. It looked like heroin. Kyle knew he shouldn't be there. But he took out his phone and started recording, silently from the hallway. The next day, Kyle emailed the footage to his criminal justice professor at the local college, who immediately contacted a journalist and the Department of Justice. That clip, along with the dash cam footage from Jalen Matthews, was all investigators needed to reopen every case Ryland had touched in the last 5 years. Search warrants were issued. Ryland's home, locker, and personal accounts were combed through. What they found was shocking. Over $112,000 in undeclared cash hidden in his garage. 3 unregistered firearms that had gone missing from evidence logs. Text messages suggesting he worked with a local bail bondsman to frame suspects who couldn't afford good lawyers. And most damning of all, a spreadsheet on his personal laptop tracking arrests by race, with notes about who would stick and who wouldn't. The racist language in those notes was nauseating. Phrases like easy to flip, hood type, and won't be missed. When the story broke, it made national headlines. Community leaders demanded justice. Protesters marched outside the precinct. And former suspects lined up to have their convictions re-examined. Ryland was arrested on 17 felony counts, including evidence tampering, theft, and obstruction of justice. He pled not guilty and claimed the system was out to get him. But the video evidence was damning. The racism, the theft, the manipulation, it was all there. The case of Officer David Ryland is a chilling reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked. His actions didn't just ruin lives, they corrupted the very foundation of justice in his community. But thanks to brave individuals, like Jalen, his mother, and Kyle, the truth finally came out. This story isn't just about one man. It's about a system that let him operate in the shadows for too long. And it's a call to demand accountability, transparency, and reform in every corner of law enforcement. Because justice should never depend on the color of your skin, or the silence of those in power. What do you think about this case? Should officers like Ryland face harsher penalties? Have you or someone you know ever experienced something similar? Tell us in the comments. We want to hear your voice. If you found this story eye-opening, hit that like button, subscribe for more true crime investigations, and check out our next video. The cop who framed 47 people and got away with it. Until now. Stay aware. Stay informed. And never stop asking questions. The arrest of Officer David Ryland did not just make waves. It sent shockwaves across the county, through newsrooms, courtrooms, and especially within the community he once policed. The fallout was swift, ugly, and deeply emotional. Almost immediately, the East Belleville Police Department scrambled to contain the damage. Their official statement, delivered by Police Chief Harold Decker, was cautious and bureaucratic. The department is cooperating fully with the ongoing investigation and will not tolerate criminal activity or racial bias in any form. But those words rang hollow for many. After all, Ryland hadn't just been another cop. He'd been one of their top officers, promoted twice, praised by the mayor, and even nominated for a regional policing award. How could no one have noticed what he was doing? The community began asking hard questions. Was it incompetence? Willful blindness? Or worse, was there a culture of silence that enabled Ryland to operate unchecked? An independent investigation, launched by the state attorney general's office, began peeling back layers that the department hadn't intended to reveal. What they found was chilling. A pattern of cover UPS. The Attorney General's task force, led by investigator Layla Monroe, uncovered internal complaints that had been buried or dismissed. One in particular stood out. A report from Officer Jorge Ramirez, filed 2 years prior, accused Ryland of improper evidence handling and making racially charged jokes in the locker room. The report had been stamped reviewed and closed with no follow-up. Ramirez, who had transferred out of the department shortly after, agreed to speak anonymously with reporters. "I knew he was dirty," Ramirez said. "Everyone knew. But if you spoke up, you were labeled difficult." They protected him because he made arrests. And in our department, arrest numbers meant promotions. Worse still, the AG's team found that body camera footage was routinely lost or corrupted in Ryland's cases, at rates far higher than any other officer. But why? The answer came in the form of a software audit. Ryland had access to the system that managed the bodycam archives. In at least 17 cases, logs showed he had edited or deleted footage after hours, violating multiple chain-of-custody protocols. It was no longer just about theft or racism. It was a full-scale manipulation of evidence, records, and surveillance. And it went deeper than anyone thought. Once the investigation widened, lawyers and activists began compiling a list of potential victims, those whose convictions were based heavily or solely on Ryland's testimony or arrests. At least 37 names appeared on the initial list. Most were Black or Latino men. Some were serving time. Others were out but carried criminal records that had shattered their futures. Among them was Marcus Trent, a 26-year-old who had been arrested in 2021 for possession with intent to distribute. He always claimed the drugs weren't his, a line the court dismissed as typical denial. But his story suddenly made sense. Marcus had worked 2 jobs and had recently been accepted into a local trade school. He had no prior convictions. Ryland had claimed to find bags of heroin in Marcus's glove compartment during a random stop. There had been no witnesses. No bodycam footage. And the dashcam footage, his lawyer had been told, was damaged in a server crash. Now, with Ryland's crimes exposed, Marcus's case was being reviewed. His mother, Linda, broke down during an interview. "I knew my son wasn't a dealer. I knew it. But the court didn't believe us. Now look. Look at what he did to us." She wasn't alone. Jalen Matthews, the teen from the original traffic stop, had his charges dropped. But he didn't feel relieved, he felt angry. "They wanted to ruin me. All because I said no to a search. If my mom hadn't fought, I'd be in prison." That man, he smiled while he destroyed people. A growing number of civil lawsuits were filed against the department, and Ryland personally. Families demanded justice. Some wanted money. Others wanted every conviction he'd touched to be vacated. The courtroom drama begins. Ryland's trial began 6 months after his arrest. He was charged with A. 6 counts of evidence tampering, A. 4 counts of obstruction of justice, A. 3 counts of theft, A. 2 counts of civil rights violations, A. 1 count of conspiracy to defraud the public. The court proceedings were broadcast statewide, and the courtroom was packed every day. Ryland appeared smug at first, pleading not guilty on all charges. His lawyer painted him as a victim of political correctness, and claimed the charges were an overreaction to isolated mistakes. But that defense crumbled quickly. Exhibit A. The body cam footage showing Ryland slipping a small packet into Jalen's car. Exhibit B. Kyle Pearson's hallway footage, Ryland stuffing a bag with narcotics and cash. Exhibit C. The spreadsheet recovered from Ryland's laptop listing suspect races, flippability, and derogatory notes. Then came the testimonies. Former suspects, community members, even fellow officers took the stand. One particularly damning moment came when a retired officer admitted he had seen Ryland pocketing evidence once, but didn't report it out of fear of retaliation. The jury was visibly shaken. After 3 weeks of testimony and 4 hours of deliberation, the verdict was read aloud. Guilty. On all counts. Ryland didn't flinch. But his family, seated behind him, broke down in tears. He was sentenced to 38 years in federal prison, with no chance of parole for the first 25. But the story was far from over. East Belleville was never the same. The mayor called an emergency town hall the night of the verdict. Hundreds of residents gathered, many with signs reading, "A justice for the framed. Reform the badge. And no more silence." A public safety committee was formed. Several key officials, including the chief of police, resigned or were removed within months. New leadership vowed to implement sweeping reforms, including a mandatory body cam uploads every 24 hours. A random third-party audits of evidence rooms. A independent review panels for use of force incidents. A bias training, cultural awareness seminars, and de-escalation certification for all officers. But many residents remained skeptical. A mother named Keisha Hartwell, whose son had been jailed based on Ryland's false testimony, summed it up best. "You don't fix this with a seminar. You fix it with accountability. With transparency. With real consequences." And yet, something had shifted. More people began attending city council meetings. Local elections saw record turnout. The town was angry, but it was also awake. While many heroes emerged during the Ryland scandal, none were more unlikely than Kyle Pearson, the teenager whose quiet courage helped expose the entire operation. After the trial, Kyle became something of a local celebrity. His phone buzzed non-stop with messages from reporters, activists, even universities offering scholarships. But Kyle didn't care about fame. "I just did what I thought was right. Honestly, I didn't think anyone would believe me," he said in an interview with 60 Minutes. When asked what he wanted to do next, Kyle's answer was simple. "I still want to be in law enforcement. But I want to change it from the inside." He enrolled at a nearby university, majoring in criminal justice. His bravery became a symbol, not just for accountability, but for hope. While Ryland sat behind bars, a bigger question loomed. How many other officers were doing the same thing and getting away with it? The DOJ began quietly reviewing other departments with similar patterns. Missing evidence, disproportionate arrests by race, and repeated claims of planted drugs. What they found was alarming. In the year following Ryland's conviction, 4 other officers in nearby counties were arrested on charges eerily similar to his. Some had worked with Ryland on task forces. Others had trained under him. It wasn't a rogue cop. It was a broken system. The media dubbed it the Ryland effect. And it prompted new federal guidelines on body cam storage, digital logging of evidence, and officer accountability. But perhaps the biggest shift happened in public opinion. People weren't just angry at Ryland, they were finally seeing the patterns. And asking questions they hadn't asked before. Rebuilding trust in law enforcement takes more than policy changes. It takes time, consistency, and humility. The newly appointed police chief, Vanessa Thompson, a black woman with a history of community engagement, made her priorities clear from day one. We're here to serve. That means listening more than we talk. And it means earning back the trust we lost, one day at a time. She launched weekly community forums, set up anonymous tip lines for misconduct, and most importantly, invited the public to audit the department's policies. Was it perfect? No. But it was a start. And for the first time in years, people began to hope that maybe, just maybe, things could change. The journalist who wouldn't let go. 2 months after Ryland's sentencing, an unassuming local reporter named Diana Reyes received an anonymous tip in a manila envelope. No return address. No letter inside. Just a flash drive labeled, Blue Badge Files. When Diana plugged it in, she found a treasure trove of internal police documents. Hundreds of pages, incident reports, internal memos, correspondence between high-ranking officers. But what caught her attention were the attached case numbers. She cross-referenced them with local court databases and found something staggering. Out of 82 cases Ryland had touched in a 5-year span, 41 involved defendants who had pleaded guilty to avoid longer sentences, many of whom had claimed innocence from day one. Diana smelled a story. A massive one. Her editor warned her to tread lightly. The town was still raw. The department was under construction. But Diana couldn't ignore what she was seeing. So she started digging. She spent late nights combing through evidence logs, interviewing public defenders, knocking on doors in neighborhoods Ryland used to patrol. What she uncovered sent chills down her spine. There was a pattern, a grim one. One of the most troubling cases involved Tyrese Holloway, a 17-year-old high school senior who disappeared shortly after an altercation with Ryland 3 years prior. Tyrese had been stopped on his way home from football practice. Ryland's report stated that Tyrese attempted to flee and discarded contraband, but no arrest was made and no charges were filed. Days later, Tyrese vanished. His mother, Cassandra, never stopped searching. She'd filed a missing persons report, begged the department to investigate Ryland's involvement, and even held weekly vigils. She never got answers. Until Diana Reyes knocked on her door with a copy of Ryland's internal notes from that same week. One note read, "Holloway, smart but slippery. Knows too much." Diana brought the note to the task force. At first, they dismissed it as vague. But when they reopened the case, they uncovered an unfiled body cam clip buried deep in the archives. The footage showed Ryland pulling Tyrese into the back of a cruiser. No Miranda warning. No documentation. No booking entry. That was the last known sighting of Tyrese. A search warrant was obtained for a property owned by Ryland's uncle, an abandoned cabin deep in the woods outside East Belleville. It had never been searched. When investigators arrived, they found articles of clothing that matched what Tyrese was last seen wearing. They also found bloodstains and shallow graves, 2 of which contained human remains. Forensic analysis confirmed what Cassandra feared. Tyrese was gone. And Ryland hadn't just been a corrupt officer. He had been something far worse. The media frenzy reignited. Suddenly, Ryland wasn't just a disgraced cop. He was potentially a serial predator hiding behind a badge. State officials opened a new investigation, this time into missing persons cases during Ryland's tenure. When the dust settled, 5 more young black men had gone missing under suspiciously similar circumstances. Each had had run-ins with Ryland. Each had been stopped and let go, with no paperwork to show for it. Each had been labeled uncooperative or potentially dangerous in Ryland's personal notes. And each had disappeared within weeks of those encounters. Forensic teams scoured properties linked to Ryland's family and hunting cabin. They found bone fragments, cell phone pieces, and even zip ties burned in a fire pit. The evidence painted a terrifying picture. Ryland may have been using his uniform as cover, to intimidate, isolate, and eliminate those he saw as undesirables. When presented with this evidence, Ryland refused to speak. His attorney issued a public statement. Mr. Ryland categorically denies involvement in any homicide. These accusations are attempts to further damage his reputation and inflame public opinion. But the facts were damning. The FBI officially labeled Ryland a suspected serial killer, and reopened cold cases across multiple counties. Ryland's original 38-year sentence was now dwarfed by the prospect of life without parole, or worse. With the new revelations, a group of former public defenders and civil rights attorneys formed a coalition called Truth Beyond the Badge. Their mission was simple: get every case Ryland touched re-examined. The group was led by attorney Malik Davenport, a seasoned civil rights litigator who had long suspected systemic abuse in East Belleville's justice system. Davenport held weekly live streams, reviewed cases live on social media, and even raised money through crowdfunding to free wrongly imprisoned individuals. He introduced the world to A. Devin Kane, sentenced to 12 years based on heroin found in his trunk. No fingerprints, no footage, and no witness but Ryland. A. Oscar Rivas, a father of two arrested during a traffic stop where Ryland claimed he smelled marijuana but later discovered unregistered weapons in the glove compartment. Oscar insisted the weapons were planted. He got 18 years. A. Leon Butler, whose case Ryland testified in, yet Ryland had never been part of the arrest team. The DA had never caught it. Davenport's coalition overturned 9 convictions in the first 3 months. They were just getting started. A grand jury subpoenaed internal emails from the East Belleville Police Department. What surfaced stunned even seasoned investigators. Among them, an email from a former captain to HR warning, "We are setting ourselves up for a lawsuit with Ryland. His arrest numbers don't match his reports. Someone will catch on eventually." A note from Ryland's supervisor, "Don't rock the boat. He gets results. If you dig, you'll regret it." A chilling line from Ryland himself in an email to a colleague, "They'll never question me. I'm the one holding the pen when history gets written." The department had known, or at least suspected, but Ryland had been their golden boy, always the first to volunteer for high-profile operations, always bringing in arrests. And in a system that rewarded results, no one asked how he got them. The Attorney General issued a blistering report titled, "Complicity in Blue: How the System Enabled a Predator in Uniform." The report became mandatory reading for law enforcement academies statewide. While the legal system grappled with the fallout, the human cost continued to mount. Families like Cassandra Holloway's, who now had confirmation of their worst nightmares, struggled to move forward. Others, like Marcus Trent's mother, began the long process of suing the city and seeking therapy for years of emotional trauma. And then there were those like Maya Lopez, the public defender who had represented 4 of Ryland's victims. She confessed during a panel, "Every time I lost a case against Ryland, I told myself I hadn't done enough. Turns out I never had a chance. The game was rigged." Suicide hotlines reported a spike in calls from formerly incarcerated individuals struggling with PTSD after their release. One caller reportedly said, "I don't know who I am anymore. I spent 5 years in a cage for something I didn't do. The man who put me there smiled while he did it." This wasn't just about criminal justice anymore. It was about the psychological wreckage left behind. Families of Ryland's suspected murder victims formed their own group, Voices Unheard. Led by Cassandra Holloway and Linda Trent, the group held vigils, organized marches, and launched a campaign demanding a full federal audits of all regional police departments, a mandatory external review boards for all police killings, and mental health support for victims of wrongful convictions. A national registry for officers with misconduct histories. They testified before Congress. They met with the Justice Department. They appeared on national talk shows. And they refused to let the story die. Their most powerful statement came during a televised memorial for the missing youths, where Cassandra read the names aloud, and ended with, "They are not statistics. They are not collateral. They are our children. And this country needs to decide, how many more?" As Ryland sat in a maximum security facility, the FBI quietly reopened a 2014 cold case involving a young white woman named Amber Rainey, who had died of an overdose in her apartment. At the time, Ryland was a beat cop and one of the first responders on the scene. The case had been closed as accidental, but something didn't sit right. Her parents claimed she had been clean for over a year and had plans to attend nursing school. Her autopsy showed unusually high levels of fentanyl, far more than any recreational dosage. The kicker? The fentanyl batch number matched several other cases where Ryland had found evidence that later disappeared from storage. The theory: Amber had witnessed something she shouldn't have. And Ryland had silenced her. Whether or not he was charged, the FBI now considered her a probable homicide victim. They added her name to a growing list. When the federal task force began profiling Ryland, they stumbled upon a lead that had been missed for years. A sealed juvenile record, buried under an alias, led them to Jackson County Youth Detention Center in a neighboring state. The boy's name? Eli Danner. The real name of Officer Jacob Ryland. The file revealed that at age 14 Ryland, then Danner, had been involved in a violent hate crime. He and two older teens had been convicted of attacking a black foster child with makeshift weapons behind a school gymnasium. The injuries were severe. The victim nearly died. Ryland had been the only one sent to a juvenile facility, due to his age and plea deal. After serving 2 years, he was released under a new name following a sealed court order. The state had wiped his record clean. How did no one know? Because law enforcement application systems in that state did not require disclosure of juvenile offenses if sealed, even violent ones. Ryland changed his name legally at 17 and enrolled in the police academy at 19. He passed with flying colors. What disturbed investigators most wasn't just the crime, but the pattern. Ryland's earliest known act of violence was against a black child. His career would be defined by disproportionate brutality against minorities, especially young men. It wasn't just misconduct anymore. It was a lifelong pathology. In the months following his reconviction, Ryland agreed to a televised interview. The network brought in renowned investigative journalist Derek Slate, known for his piercing interview style. Ryland appeared thinner, but calm. Still cocky. Still rehearsed. The interview began with surface-level questions: training, department politics, community engagement. But Slate cut in. "Let me ask you something straight. Were you ever afraid people would see who you really were?" Ryland blinked, then smirked. "What do you think they saw?" "I think they saw a man who knew exactly how to game the system, who had a taste for power and a hatred for challenge. Someone who targeted the people least likely to be believed." There was a pause. Then Ryland said something that made headlines across the country. "I didn't target them because no one would believe them. I targeted them because I knew someone would thank me for it." The chilling clarity of that statement echoed long after the segment aired. Slate leaned in and asked, "Who thanked you?" Ryland leaned back and smiled. "The system." The prison interview aired across every major platform. Civil rights advocates called it the most damning public confession of institutional bias ever televised. In the wake of Ryland's public revelations and the exposure of his sealed past, East Belleville was forced to confront its failures. The city's mayor, once an ardent defender of the police force, resigned in disgrace after leaked emails showed he had been warned of Ryland's behavior multiple times. The police chief who once promoted Ryland was fired, and the department was placed under a federal consent decree, requiring oversight, structural reform, and a total rebuild of hiring and evidence handling procedures. A community accountability board was formed, composed of citizens, former inmates, educators, and clergy. Their first action: hosting monthly open forums called the People's Bench, where citizens could directly address leadership and lodge misconduct complaints in public. The turnout for the first meeting exceeded 700 people. For those wrongfully imprisoned due to Ryland's lies, life outside wasn't easy, but it was theirs again. Devin Kane, once a quiet young man who'd lost his 20s behind bars, now spoke at schools about how injustice doesn't just live in courtrooms, it walks the streets in uniforms too. Oscar Rivas became a community organizer, opening a boxing gym for at-risk youth. He said it was his way of making sure they never meet a man like Ryland. Leon Butler, the man Ryland never arrested but still testified against, became a published poet. His collection, Lines Between Bars, was nominated for a regional book award. But the joy of homecoming was shadowed by trauma. Most of them spoke of anxiety attacks when seeing a squad car, and nightmares of being pulled over or framed again, a guilt for those who hadn't made it out alive. Therapists began offering free services to these exonerees, and the city allocated funding for re-entry support programs. Amid the ruins of the East Belleville PD, one name began to rise: Officer Jeremy Nolan. Nolan had once been Ryland's partner, briefly. After only 4 patrols together, Nolan had submitted a formal complaint. He described Ryland as predatory, prone to escalation, and inconsistent with evidence protocol. That report had vanished, until Diana Reyes uncovered a carbon copy in her anonymous file. Nolan's complaint had been buried by a superior who had since retired. But now, with the truth out, Nolan became a key witness in multiple trials and was invited to join the new Internal Ethics Board. When asked why he'd spoken up so early, Nolan answered simply, "I didn't join to bully. I joined to serve." That guy wasn't a cop. He was a wolf in uniform. Nolan's courage sparked a national conversation about whistleblowers in law enforcement. The Ryland case broke beyond local headlines. States across the U.S. began investigating their own departments for patterns of fabricated evidence, excessive force, and improper hiring practices. In California, a task force uncovered 23 sealed juvenile records among active officers. In Georgia, an audit found that over 70 arrest records lacked corresponding body cam footage, all from a single unit. Congress introduced a bill called the Blue Stripe Act, Better Lawful Uniform Enforcement Standards for Transparency, Reform, Integrity, Protection, and Equity. It proposed a national misconduct database accessible to all departments, federal funding incentives for departments that adopt community oversight boards, a ban on hiring officers with histories of violence, falsification, or hate group affiliation, and mandatory mental health screenings and implicit bias training for all recruits. While the bill met resistance in some quarters, public support surged after Ryland's story became a Netflix docuseries called Behind the Badge, The Ryland Files. The public wanted change, and they demanded it loudly. At the center of this storm remained Cassandra Holloway. She never missed a rally, a hearing, or a press conference. She became the face of grieving mothers across the nation. Her TED Talk, "My Son Was Not a Suspect, He Was a Story," was viewed over 18 million times. In it, she recounted her son's final week, the police indifference, and the agony of waiting for closure. They didn't lose evidence. They discarded it. Because it wasn't evidence to them, it was an inconvenience. My son was an inconvenience. She was invited to meet with the president. She spoke at the United Nations on racialized policing. She launched the Tyrese Holloway Foundation, funding scholarships and youth leadership programs for boys of color. And when asked what justice felt like, Cassandra responded, "Justice is knowing that no mother after me has to scream in the dark and hear nothing back." Despite the overwhelming evidence and public fury, Ryland's legal team filed one last appeal, on grounds of psychological instability and media prejudice. They claimed his childhood trauma and brain injuries made him unfit for a fair trial and incapable of fully understanding the consequences of his actions. But the appellate judge, after reviewing hours of Ryland's own statements, refused. In her ruling, she wrote, "Mr. Ryland did not act in confusion. He acted in confidence. His crimes were not spontaneous, they were systemic. He manipulated, exploited, and destroyed with awareness, not ignorance." Appeal denied. Ryland would die behind bars. But for many, that wasn't the point anymore. The real question became, how many other Rylands are still out there? After the Ryland case exploded into national consciousness, the momentum for reform was impossible to ignore. The Blue Stripe Act ignited debate across the country. Supporters included families of victims, civil rights organizations, community leaders, and a surprising number of current and former officers who believed policing had strayed too far from its purpose. Opposition came from hardline law enforcement unions, political factions citing anti-police rhetoric, and media figures who painted the act as a war on cops. The House vote passed narrowly, but it was in the Senate where everything stalled. Lobbyists flooded D.C., whispering that the bill would gut police morale, drown departments in red tape, and create national databases that felt like surveillance. But then something changed. A viral moment on the Senate floor. Senator Maria Okafor, whose brother had been killed during a traffic stop in a case eerily similar to Ryland's, rose to speak. Cameras captured her trembling hands as she clutched a worn photograph. "You ask if this bill is anti-police? Let me ask you, was my brother's killing pro-justice? Was the system that let Jacob Ryland destroy lives for years pro-safety?" She held the photo high. "You say you're worried this will make officers afraid. Good. Because for decades, my community has been terrified every time we see flashing lights." Her speech was replayed millions of times. 2 moderate senators flipped their votes. And on a rainy Thursday morning, the Blue Stripe Act passed 52 to 48. It was signed into law the following week. 2 years after Ryland's conviction, East Belleville Police Department was officially dissolved. The city didn't fix it. It replaced it. In its place came the Community Safety and Justice Agency, CSJA. CSJA operated with a civilian oversight, a non-police crisis response unit, a mandatory body cam uploads every shift, a rotating council interviews before officer promotions, a monthly community integration sessions, public events that brought officers out of patrol cars and into barbershops, schools, and faith spaces. Recruitment changed too. CSJA prioritized local hires, transparency in disciplinary records, and trauma-informed training. New officers took oaths not just to enforce law, but to repair trust. Among the first to be sworn in? Officer Jeremy Nolan. He was joined by Tyrese Holloway's cousin, now a community outreach coordinator. For the first time in a long time, people cheered when they saw the badge. Jacob Ryland spent the last months of his life in federal prison in Colorado, under solitary confinement after multiple altercations. He refused interviews. He stopped speaking to his lawyers. And then he died. The cause? A massive stroke, officially. But rumors swirled. Some inmates claimed Ryland had been quietly beaten months earlier and suffered recurring seizures. Others believed guards had simply let nature take its course. No investigation was opened. His family did not claim the body. No funeral was held. He was cremated and interred in an unmarked grave by the Bureau of Prisons. For many, the news brought closure. But for others it brought something else. Emptiness. Because no death, no matter how poetic, could erase what Ryland had done. Or what a system had allowed. Years later, Cassandra Holloway stood at the dedication of the Tyrese Holloway Center for Justice and Reform, a sprawling facility offering a legal aid for wrongfully accused, a training for aspiring public defenders, a library and museum documenting modern civil rights struggles. She cut the ribbon herself. This building isn't for Tyrese. He doesn't need it anymore. It's for the next Tyrese. So that one day there won't be one. She stepped back and a choir began singing, "A change is gonna come." Some called her a modern-day Rosa Parks. She rejected that title. "I'm just a mom who refused to sit down." Across the country, other cities followed East Belleville's lead. And in Detroit, officers now wore body cams with live citizen access portals. In Atlanta, police stations housed resident advisory offices. In Newark, disciplinary records were publicly accessible by default. Academies began training cadets on a racial trauma, a restorative justice, a systemic bias. Police unions pushed back, but public pressure didn't ease. The word officer was being redefined. And not by lawmakers, but by communities who refused to be policed in silence. 3 years after Ryland's death, something strange happened. A young woman named Rachel Danner came forward, claiming to be Ryland's estranged daughter from a teenage relationship. She requested access to his sealed personal writings from prison. She got them. Inside the documents were handwritten manifestos, detailing Ryland's twisted philosophies, a blend of supremacy, fear, and paranoia. Some pages revealed he had planned to run for sheriff, hoping to cleanse the city properly. But in one letter, dated a week before his stroke, Ryland wrote something else. "They think they stopped me. But I was never the only one. Look closer. They're still wearing the badge." Rachel gave the letter to the Justice Department. A new task force was launched. The work wasn't done. Not even close. One man may have worn the uniform, but his actions exposed a system built to protect power, not people. Ryland is gone. But the wounds he left behind remind us that justice isn't just about punishment, it's about prevention. And it starts with uncomfortable truths. What did you think of this case? Let us know in the comments. If you believe in accountability and the power of truth, hit subscribe for more eye-opening stories. And don't miss our next episode, where we expose how one small-town mayor turned a police department into his personal army. Because the truth always fights back.